So with that range of motion going on in there, what we're going to do now is just select the mesh, bring back the paint weights tool. I'm going to hide the control curves just so we can see the mesh. Probably bring back those joints just so we can see where they are. And also, if I just double click on this, I think it might be in display. Yeah, so down here in display, you've got the different types of display. So we can draw brush so we can't see the brush. If you want to see the brush, I usually keep that on because it's quite helpful. Show wireframe, they're pretty self-explanatory, but the main ones is things like X-ray joints. So if you want the joints to show through the mesh, this is usually ticked on by normal. So if you don't have the paint skin weights tool, the X-ray joints is up here, top right of the viewport, but it's usually on by default with the skin weights tool, so it's quite useful for that. So with that range of motion, we're just going to go through and check these areas. So have a look for one of these problem areas. So this part here with the eye, well, where the antenna meets the head, we're getting some really bad crumpling there. So I'll go to 300. And we'll have a look at what's going on here. So what most likely is, if I take the influence of this, it's probably going to have a large influence in this area. So you can see this is why it's crumpling. This joint's getting rotated with that antenna control, because it's got influence down here, it's crumpling that in. So, and again, this is why we want to be in the, so you press 1 on your mesh, which is a normal resolution. Having it smooth mesh preview, or free, you can see how we're not getting the actual, position of these vertices. So it can be quite deceiving. So here it looks, oh, that's quite smooth angle, but really it's just a hard angle. No, this one's got no influence and then boom, straight up there. So I just keep it on 1, so the normal resolution. So with this range of motion here, it's quite useful because we can just scrub in the timeline. Go down here. I can quickly remove this area, then scrub in the timeline again, see what that looks like. Okay, it's looking a bit better. Scrub back. Going to remove a bit more. Probably like to make this brush a bit smaller. I'll probably replace that edge loop round there to 1, because it's pretty much exactly on that joint. Remove influence of the back of the head here, and probably these joints down here. I'm just holding control and doing just a quick sweep around the back just to make sure I haven't missed any. Okay, and scrub back and we'll see, hang on a minute, it hasn't really fixed that area. But what we have to remember is, because these joints are quite close together, if I just select the second ribbon, we can see that this also has quite a large influence down here. So we'll do the same down here. And this is an area where we could actually just go to a value of 0, flood it, bring it back to a value of 1 and re-add its influence. So this is where we can just tell it to have no influence and then manually paint it back in. So I'm just going to add that edge loop round there and actually just go to the smooth and flood. Go back to the replace and re-add value of 1. And if you want specific values, I could add 1 around that middle edge loop, set the value to 0.5 and then replace that, on the next loop down, or 0.1 0.25 if that's a bit too much, so place for a value of 0.25. You know, so we can be quite specific with what we actually want. So around here I'm just setting a manual values of 0.5, just replacing that. Holding the B key. And a value 0 down here. Okay, that's looking okay. Quite like that. Check it again. Ooh, we're getting a little bit less crumpling now. So it's just a case of seeing a problem area, experimenting with what might be causing it, find the cause, so it's the next antenna, try fix it, flood it with a value of 0, and go back to where it's straight, and then add a value of 0.5 on both of these. Actually, I'll just add a value of 1. And you can see here I'm adding a value of 1, which means it's got full influence over that joint. But if I go to the joint below, so that's the O3, so if I go to the joint below, this also has some influence. So really, because it's white, that doesn't mean it's solely just going to follow that one joint, because a joint can have full white on, you know, a vertex actually could have full white on every single joint. It just means that it's going to average between those joints. So it's going to take 100% of the this is translates and rotates, and 100% of this translates and rotates, and get the average between them. So this is just going to be, if this joint has full white, which is 1, this has, and if this had 0.5, that would mean that it's going to take 0.5 of its translates and 100% of this translates, and average between them, but keeping this one as half. So you just got to be aware that setting it to a value of 1 doesn't mean that it's absolutely going to follow that joint, because you could still have another joint with it painted to 1 as well. So moving up here again, you can see there's less and less influence. So now it's starting to look quite good. I'm not getting as much crumple. So for the 4, I'll do the same again. Value of 0, flood, and then I'll replace it. And what I'm going to do is just replace these with a value of 1, and then flood with smooth, just to get that smooth fall off. I might want to smooth that down here as well, and replace with a value of 1 again. Okay, so the next method is we can use the component editor as well. So we can go to Windows, General Editors, Component Editor, and this is going to show the components of this object. And the one we're particularly bothered about is this smooth skin. So I'll click smooth skin. I'm going to go to the vertex and select the vertices around here. And you can see we get this big massive sort of Excel spreadsheet. And what this is telling me is it's telling the actual weight values in a numeric form. So we're not seeing that nice, you know, display. So it depends which way you want to use. But this is the more sort of brute force way of manually putting in values. So it can be quite useful if you've got a few tricky verts that are flying away, or if you want to put specific values and you don't want to fiddle about, you know, with the paintbrush tool, because it can be quite tricky if the verts are quite close together. So here, for instance, if I select this vertex here, I can actually tell, dragging these out, we've got the names of the joints at the top. So these are the joints that can influence it, and the total. So the total weight is 2.053. So in here we can actually manually input values that we want. So again, that's Windows, General Editors, Component Editor. We can go to Options and go to Hide Zero Columns. So basically, if for instance this joint up here, or if for instance some of these joints we didn't have any weight onto it, but I wanted to add some weight to it, you can't see it in the graph, so we can't add it. So what I can do is just go to Options, Hide Zero Columns, and this is going to show every single joint that's attached to the skin. And now I could manually search for that joint, search for its name, and input a number. And then I could go Options, Hide Zero Columns, and because it's no longer a zero column, it'd now show up here. So that's how you could, manually add weights. And again, because when we went to Skin, Bind Skin, Interactive or Smooth Bind, because we unchecked Maintain Max Influence, this means that we're not constrained to 4 joints. We can add as many influences as we want. So that way we can, add some more influences. But for me, for the bulk of the skinning, I find it a lot easier to go ahead and use these paint weights tool. So I'm just going to go back to object mode so I can paint on this. Flood with 1, flood with 0, and again going in and just painting those values. Holding Shift to smooth it, and you can get the sort of gist of what's going on. I'm just removing the influence of areas I don't need it to be, re-adding it, smoothing it off so we get a nice ease in and ease out. It's not going to be too harsh. Replace with a value of 0 again. Add these back in. So it's just a really, once you know how the tools work, once you know how to add influence and remove influence and sort of get it working along, you can see that it's just more of a tedious manual job going around here and skinning it. But the results will be rewarding because obviously setting up this eye for the main bits, we're not getting this crumpling down here anymore. So we're getting a little bit, so we'll need to figure out which joint is that. So I'm just going to go further up in the hierarchy. This antenna, you can see it's no longer the antenna anymore. So we're doing a good job of skinning these though. You can see this is looking quite good. So we'll probably want to keep progressing up the antenna, but I'll let you do that outside of this video because you'll just be repeating the same methods along here, getting that nice fall off. So let's have a look down here. And again, one thing we could do, go to vertex, select that vertex and go back to the component editor. I can see here the actual weighted values. So instead of trying to search for it in the paint weights tool, I can actually manually look for it. You can see here we've got another error, but we'll have a look into that in a sec. So it's using the JTBN back ribbon and the left antenna 1. So go back to the paint weights tool. I'm going to right click, select influence, and this is the top of the head, which really, because we added these ribbons, we added influence, they've taken quite a lot of influence off the head joint. So you can see it's got pretty much no influence down here, so I want to start re-adding this. So I'll make sure I'm in object mode, so right click on the mesh object mode, press Y to reactivate the last tool, which was the skinning, and start replacing with a value of 0 again. value of 1. And I'm going to go to the hard brush this time. Bring it back to the pose at 200 and start replacing with a value of 1. So I'm bringing back the influence to the top head joint. And I'm just going to brute force, with the no drop off, whack this straight on there. So we don't want it to have influence of these antennas, but I'm just going to whack it on straight away, and then we'll start removing it. Now we can see some joints, so I'm going to make sure I get inside the nostrils. We want them to follow along with the head. But we can see some verts snapping right down here. So one thing we could do, go to vertex mode, select that vert, go to Windows, General Editors. Actually, just before I do, you can see here by pressing 3 for the smooth mesh preview, it still looks pretty bad actually, yeah. But it's not giving us a true result where these vertices are. So I just want to double check that it's in. So it's always good not to be in smooth mesh preview. So with this vertex selected, we could try the component editor, but before we do, I'm just going to try the hammer tool. So with that vertex selected, click the hammer tool and press F to frame it up, and you can see, which vert was it? It was that vertex right there. So you can see using the hammer tool, it's sort of, looked at the verts around it, it's realised that, hang on a minute, I'm missing something here. These verts are all following the head and the antenna, and I'm sort of stuck down here, so I should really be following the guys around me. So the hammer tool is basically a brute force way of getting it to recheck itself. If we go back to the, so you can see that's looking quite good now. We can start looking at the, so you can see here, we've added more influence back to the head, and all of a sudden that antenna spinning round is looking quite good now. They're not getting any crumpling here. So we've fixed that pretty much, but it's by no means done yet, because we've just brute force, with a hard brush, whacked that back in there. So I just want to start removing this. So I've got the soft brush, and I'm just replacing it with a value of 1 and holding control to invert it, so replacing it with a value of 0. I'm just going to go ahead and we can start to get the bend in there. You can see it's quite angular there, so it's not preserving sort of crumpling here, so I want to smooth again, smooth that around there. And it doesn't matter too much about doing the right hand side because we're going to mirror it over. So you can see just by doing a bit of time, paying a bit of attention to that, we can start to get that looking quite nice. Okay, and then again down here I probably want to remove, make sure there's no influence in that nose. And what I'll probably actually do is do the same with the component editor towards the end, get the verts of the nose and the inside of the mouth, and just take any strange influences that we don't want away. Okay, so I'm just going to save this, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go back to the default position and just go to skin, edit smooth skin, and we're going to go to mirror skin weights, and I'll just reset the settings. Okay, so we're going to mirror across the YZ, so the Y is going up, Z is pointing forward, so we're getting that YZ plane, which the character and the rig has been mirrored across, so we want the YZ. And what we're doing, we're taking it from the positive X, which is this side, to the negative. So we're taking it from the left to the right. Well, the character's left. So if you've got it coming from the other side, you want to uncheck this, so it goes from negative to positive. But I want it from positive to negative. You can choose different methods here, but as we mirrored this geometry perfectly, it shouldn't matter too much. And we just want the closest joint. I'll just leave it pretty much as default and just click mirror. And we'll see what that's given us. So you can see here, as he bends his arm down, bends this up, we're getting the same as we did down here. So we've only skinned the armpit on this side, and now we've mirrored that to the other side, and that's not looking too shabby actually. So you can see here we're just halving the amount of work we're doing. I'm just going to do it to the left hand side and mirror it across. Same up here with the antennas. So if actually I'm going to show the NURBS curves, so show the control curves. Let's manually wiggle this about. Make sure we've got the selection mask at the top so I can select it. Just going to move this about. It's not looking too bad. So we can see here it's mirrored. It's moving these verts in the middle of the face. It's also doing it on the same side, so it might have mirrored them across. But in my experience, sometimes when you're mirroring skin weights, it sometimes has a few issues with the verts in the middle. It might give subtle influences to other things, especially if you're mirroring a joint that is in the middle. So like these ribbon spine, so its backbone is the joints are all set in the middle. So sometimes when it's mirroring it across, it might not do as expected. But again, we're just going to do as best job on the left hand side, mirror it across, and then look for any errors like that. So that's just a quick look into how we can, get that range of motion in there. There's quite a few areas to fix. So like this back, this tail along here. Want to continue up the antennas like we were at the base, mirror that across to the other side. So we'll just check that actually. I'll select the mesh, go back to the paint weights tool, select influence, and you can see that's been mirrored across correctly, because before it was really dull, but now we've got that nice white band in the middle smoothing off, so it's mirrored across okay. So that's just a look at the skin weights tool, paint skin weights tool. And like I said, for this tutorial we've gone through start to finish, but this last phase of manually painting these weights, it's going to be quite time consuming and tedious, and I don't want to spend, upload loads of videos of me just going through skinning these, because the method of skinning this tail and the arms and the fingers is going to be the exact same as the antennas as we've just done. One thing to mention with the fingers though, the best thing to do is just select your finger control. I'm going to spread, so I'm going to spread that finger right out, curl it up, and then I'm going to go in and start, so I can right click on this joint, select influence, start replacing with a value of 0. So with the fingers, because it's the cylinders and it's got this straight joint hierarchy going through it, it's going to do a pretty decent job. So I'm going to set that to a solid brush. It's going to do a decent job. The only area we really need to clean up is make sure the knuckles work quite well, and then just remove any influence off the other finger. So you don't want this finger influencing that finger, and you don't want this finger influencing that finger. So you can just go through manually, check. So it's done quite a good job. So you can see these are subtly moving, so if it looks black, if it looks dark, you always want to just double check, because you don't want any slight influences. And the same from this finger. Select influence, it's got a little bit of influence over here, so I'll just remove that again. Same for this joint, select influence. If you look here, it looks like there's no influence, but if you watch closely as I remove it, you can see some of these verts popping slightly, so this one up here moved. So there is a little bit of influence in there. So we just need to go through with the fingers and just manually remove it from the opposite side. So you can see now, as I'm moving that about, it's not affecting that other finger. It's worked quite well though with the default values, default skinning values. Okay, so, and again you're going to do that to the left hand side and mirror it across. So I'm going to pause this, or going to end this tutorial here. I'm just going to use the same methods that I've just gone through there, and just go through and edit the skin weights of this entire character. So just reuse the same methods I've used in this tutorial and just apply them to the rest of the character.